small group of U.S. Special Forces has reportedly fled from the Syrian town of al-Rai near the Turkish border after being threatened by rebel fighters. This is an alleged video of the incident that surfaced online. Rebels, reportedly belonging to a group backed by the US, are heard chanting anti-American slogans. The US forces reportedly crossed the Turkish border into Syria as part of an operation to coordinate airstrikes against ISIL. However, it seems they decided to return back to Turkey after Syrian rebels furiously protested against their presence in the area. The rebels were chanting anti-American slogans as well as threatening the troops with violence. Earlier, Washington had confirmed that it was assisting Turkey in its anti-ISIL operations in the area. The Pentagon hasn't yet commented on the latest reports. We'll be bringing you more on this story. We can now cross to our correspondent in Syria, Lizzie Phelan. Lizzie, good to see you. What more do we know about this so far?
Hi, Nikki. How are you doing? I'm actually just arrived to Beirut, just left Syria. But I have been following this story nevertheless, and the Pentagon, obviously, as you said, hasn't yet responded to these videos that have emerged. But they have, of course, confirmed that they do have special operations forces accompanying Turkish military forces and Turkish-backed rebels in northern Syria around the al-Rai area where these videos emerged from, and further east in Jarablus. And this is likely to be very embarrassing for the United States. Free Syrian Army fighters, the so-called moderate rebels that the Americans and the Turks have been insisting for years now are the acceptable opposition in Syria, openly calling for the slaughter of American forces and calling their presence in Syria an invasion of Syrian lands. As I said, very embarrassing for the Americans and really highlighting the problems of the Americans openly intervening in a country like Syria, in the Middle East rather, where their past interventions really bring up many bad memories for people in the region. And it seems like the only place that they're really kind of more openly wanted is in the Kurdish areas of Syria. Of course, the Americans now have been backing the predominantly Kurdish militia, the YPG, since 2014, when the Kurds famously defeated ISIS in the town of Ain al-Arab in Kurdish, and more famously internationally known as Kobani. And just yesterday, there were pictures and videos that emerged of American flags flying above another town controlled by the YPG near to Kobani called Tel Abyad. And today, a CNN reporter said that U.S. officials have said that initial reports suggest that those flags were placed there by American forces as a warning to Turkey and Turkish-backed forces not to attack Americans, because, of course, Turkey has openly declared war on the Americans' Kurdish allies and pledged to push them back from the border that it shares with Syria. So a really worrying situation for the Americans and the problems that they're facing growing with the growing numbers of boots on the ground backing a growing amount of groups in Syria.
Lizzie, thanks for that. RT's Lizzie Phelan there. Thanks again. Without further ado, let's go straight over to our guest, Max Abrams, a professor of political science at Northeastern University. Mr. Abrams, welcome to the programme. Now, if it is confirmed that US forces had to flee from American-backed rebels, what does that say about Washington's Syria strategy?
Well, I think that it underscores how problematic it is for the U.S. to put boots on the ground. We've discovered this many times in the Muslim world when the U.S. deploys its troops, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. Ultimately, the U.S. is seen as the enemy. We're seen as the occupiers. And so in that sense, it's very, very counterproductive. Furthermore, the incident really highlights the difficulty Americans have been having in identifying moderate Syrian rebels. The U.S. has spent over $1 billion each year since about 2011, 2012 to develop a moderate Syrian opposition. And this has been, it's been worse than wasted money. Not only have we been unable to find effective rebel fighters for us, but in many cases, the ones identified as moderate, especially those from the Free Syrian Army, have defected to the al-Qaeda affiliate there, Nusra, or even to Islamic State. So the fact that this Free Syrian Army group, which is known in the United States as among the most moderate of all the rebels, the fact that they would threaten to slaughter Americans really shouldn't actually be that surprising given their track record.
Now, these rebels were reportedly calling the American soldiers infidels and crusaders. And now these are forces that are supposed to be working together. What could have changed or sparked the change in their attitude towards the Americans?
I honestly don't think that there's a big change in their attitude. I think it's a misperception by the U.S. administration that these rebel fighters are moderate. I've been saying for years now that they're actually not moderate, that many of them are, Salafist. They work together with al-Qaeda for a reason. Not necessarily these guys in particular, but other rebel groups like al-Rai, al-Sham are almost inseparable from Nusra. And so I think that the U.S. has overestimated how useful these rebels will be on the ground. And only now, when the U.S. actually embeds itself on the ground, and when incidents like these are caught on video, does it become undeniable that actually they're really quite extreme.
Now, the U.S. claims to only back so-called moderate rebels. Do you think that the U.S. needs to have a rethink in how they categorize these rebels now, especially after this latest incident?
The reason why we haven't been able to find moderate rebels isn't due to a lack of looking. We've looked very, very hard. We wanted to find moderate rebels to both displace Islamic State and Nusra, and even to replace the Assad regime. The reason why we haven't been able to work with the rebels is because it turns out that there really aren't that many moderates who are effective fighters. And so I think the problem isn't in our ability to identify the moderates. I think the real problem is overall the lack of real moderates.